legalizefreedom.com.
Hello, Thomas, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us this evening on legalizefreedom.com.
Hi, Greg.
Hi, thanks for having us.
So, guys, people who don't already know, the two of you have been doing for some time now. It was a video series, Hocus Focus, focusing on all things Fortean, hauntology, bizarre, strange, mythical, magical, you name it. But the occasion of our chat this evening is on the fact that you've just brought a book out, or it's just about to come out, drawing on the topics that you've covered in the series. The book's called Hocus Focus, Merging Forteana, Hauntology and High Strangeness. Before we get started properly having a talk, for both of you, in the unlikely event that viewers don't know who you are, your backgrounds, just each of you just give a little potted bio, please.
Okay, well, I come from a working class background. I live in the north of England and I'm now a Fortean author, and I make videos on YouTube, and I'm a blogger, and I like to explore the mysteries of the unknown, and I co-present Hocus Focus with Thomas, and it's a monthly YouTube show where we go into Fortean, occult and esoteric subjects, and we also review Fortean books and folk horror films. I have a website which is a hub for my writing on these topics as well, and that kind of reflects my lifelong passion for the paranormal. I try my best to preserve the old world and honour our ancestors through stories and folklore. I'm very interested in folklore, and in my spare time I like creating art and using different media and styles, and that includes moving pictures and film recently. And I've got a YouTube channel as well as putting Hocus Focus on there, and I also explore Fortean mysteries, and that kind of invites viewers to just look beyond the ordinary and beyond the surface.
I'm from, pardon me, start again. I'm from the north side of Dublin, from a working class background too. I'm a product of the occult revival of the early 1970s, which happened just before my formative years and played an enormous influence on everything I've done to this day, including Hocus Focus. Can't hear you, Greg.
Schoolboy error. You mentioned, Thomas, the occult revival of the 1970s, and you and I are of a similar age. Sarah clearly much younger, but that was something that was happening just prior to when I really started to explore the Fortean and the unusual and magic and mythology in the 1980s. But I'll get you two to give me your take on this. But for me, initially, the feeling was, and I had this all my life when I really started thinking about what the situation was I found myself in, there's the reality of this world, what's going on here. But initially it was that there's something wrong here. But then laterally, quite early on, but after that, I started to revise that a little bit because it sounded a bit Gnostic. And it wasn't that there's something wrong with where we are as such, but it's not how it seems. It's not what it seems to be. It's certainly not what we're being told it was. We were allegedly at a point in human history and development that was, allegedly the most advanced in every term, including terms of thinking and understanding of reality. But it seemed to me that was my takeaway, really, that this is not what it seems to be. Therefore, I started to look around for other writers, filmmakers, thinkers, ideas, concepts, philosophies that spoke to that. And then I found actually there were lots of them with lots of common threads, and also they went back as far in human history as we can see. And actually what we're living through, still living through, is actually quite an anomalous little bowl of misunderstanding, of misperception of reality.
Yeah, I'll go first. I had the same feeling growing up. I had this notion that anybody could be ordinary. What's the point? And I didn't really have any interest in anything mainstream, even as a young child. I didn't really like pop music growing up. I didn't like the stuff I was hearing until I think I heard T-Rex and Mark Bolan, and that was because it was just so different and weird sounding. And it was the first thing to catch my attention. I had no interest in like the films that kids watched when I was a kid. I didn't watch Star Wars. I still haven't never seen a Star Wars film, and I didn't care for things like that. But I was basically only interested in kind of horror and supernatural and Fortean and occult stuff from a very early age, and not just in, you know, reading fiction books on it and looking at occult books, but I was saturated in things like Warren comics, creepy and eerie comics, and things like that from America. And the late night films on the BBC, the double feature they have on a Saturday or Friday night, where they'd show like a Hammer film and maybe an MGM horror monster film. And that was just it. I had no interest in anything that was mainstream, nothing really, you know, very little. And so to me, it was a way for me from a very early age to live an alternative life that didn't seem to be the same as everyone else. That was a huge factor for me.
That's the same for me. I recall being at school and being in school, but not really there as well. I just kind of lived in my head at school, and I was always into strange things, and I was influenced and sort of enthralled really by some of the books that we had in the library. We had 1 or 2 Fortean books in the library. We had some of the Reader's Digest, Book of the Unexplained and things like that. And I used to go in there and bury my head in those books. And some of the other kids used to say I was a bit weird, you know, spooky Sarah. But that didn't bother me because I always felt a little bit different and never understood what that meant. I don't mean different as in special or unique, but just that I didn't fit in, but not because there was something wrong with me. I felt like it's something wrong with everybody else, but I didn't understand what it was. So I kind of lived in my head, and that, like Thomas, I read lots of books and I watched lots of horror films, Hammer House of Horror double bills on a Friday night, BBC Two. I used to love that. I used to think about that all day at school, coming home, being allowed to stay up and watch that. I grew up in a haunted house. And that made it clear to me that there's more to life than what we can physically see. And I had imaginary friends when I was a very young girl. I used to talk to them. I don't remember what they looked like, but I do remember one of them was called Rupert. Now, whether that was based on Rupert the Bear or whether his real name was Rupert, I don't know. But he was there, and he used to sit on the tap, and he used to follow me around the house. So I've had that mindset from a really young age, and I'm really grateful to it because it's helped me get through the challenges of the past few years with some clarity. And then as I've gotten older, I've gone a long life, and I'm responsible. I've gone along to get along for a while. Dabbled in the New Age for a little bit, but I think that was necessary to put me on the pagan path that I'm on now, because I think you need to explore some of these things that we think it's this way, but it isn't. I think we need to see it the wrong way first so that we realize that that's not the way it is. And some of those paths that I've been on, such as the New Age, it wasn't the answer. And it taught me that a lot of things you're being told is this way and it's that way, and that's not the case at all. So it just led me to the understanding that I have of the world today. And I think we all go through fads and phases, but I think developing a Fortean mindset, as I call it, it's really important, and it does help you to see through the illusion and have an open mind, and not just say that the world is this way because I've seen it on a YouTube video, but to say the world is this way and it could be this reason, it could be that reason. So you need to keep an open mind that it could be a number, it could be anything. None of us know the ultimate truth of how reality is. We only know what we think it is.
One thing that I experienced very powerfully quite early on in my life, and I continue to observe it, and it kind of fits, you know, locks in with what you're both saying, is this idea that a lot of children have, and maybe they maintain that throughout childhood, maybe even into adulthood, the idea that the adults, when you're a child, have got things worked out. They know what's going on. They got it sorted. And it's children that are, you know, we use the word childish. It's children that have got issues and problems. But, you know, you talk about, you grew up, you know, you mature. And I remember being disabused of this quite early on in my life when I saw how childish adults could be. And I see this every day, you know, in life. So it's an important idea, I think. I mean, look at what's happening in our political scene at the minute. Just that, you know, the absolute, you know, infantile nonsense that's passed off as like national politics in the UK and the US and elsewhere. That's just one example, but you see it in the media, you see it in culture, you see it in society in general, everywhere you look. So there's this, I say, myth that that, you know, children don't know much at all of anything, grow up mature, become adults, but it's adults who've made the world that we see around us, the world that's currently coming undone at a rate of knots. And also that's the same world, by the way, as you said, Sarah, that this Fortean mindset has been helping us navigate, and we'll get into that more later.
I think it's because adults, they lose their sense of childlike wonder. It's often browbeaten out of them because they get classed as being weird, and a lot of people don't like that. They don't like to be ridiculed. So I think you've got to be quite robust, but they have that childlike wonder knocked out of them, and they lose the magic, because when you're a child, everything is magic. You know, everything's new, everything, you're learning something, and everything's fascinating. And I think as adults grow up, you're told that you've got to knuckle down, grow up, mature, get a job, go to college, whatever. And I think everybody's browbeaten and frightened of ridicule. And eventually, I think your sixth sense, or, you know, your ability to see beyond the veil, it just goes away. And you're left with living in a 5-sensory reality, work, sleep, and then rinse and repeat the following day.
That never really happened to me. I knew when I was a kid I was never going to grow out of it, and I never did. And I'm kind of very glad I didn't, because it kept me sane during my work life. Even when I worked in corporate life, I was still scouring, you know, places for books and fanzines. The fanzine explosion of the 80s and 90s was a huge influence on me. And I had the daily work life, but my evenings were filled with the same stuff I'm filled with now. I found, possibly because I don't have any children, made it easier, I guess. But also, I just, you know, I've been good at demarcating the daily life, the work life, and then that life separately. So, I mean, the thought of losing it would almost makes me cry, because then, like, the magic would be completely gone out of my life, because there wouldn't be much left. There'd be hobbies and other things like that, sure, but that stuff, it adds a sort of, it's like the bubbles in the champagne of your life. It actually gives you something that's more than just existence or past the time. It provides, it's such a powerful gift to have in your life, I think. From every level, like literary, artistic, especially artistic, but also the ability to own the. I think if we grow up in Christian societies, but the nearest thing we had to avatars, like you have in the Hindu world, was that stuff. You know what I mean? We could actually identify individuals as archetypes that we saw in these books and novels and so on. That's what led me to write Puzzling People. I was seeing avatars around me in the Wall Street banks, and not just nut jobs, that were greedy nut jobs.
In terms of the modern age that we live in, and this is kind of everything that the three of us and our colleagues, friends working in similar areas are pushing back against, is the kind of disease of fundamentalist materialism. It's not that the three-dimensional world that we experience, that the three of us are in now is somehow to be dismissed, as I say, like, that Gnostic idea, or that we can't trust our five senses to deliver some information about that 3D world, but it's not all there is. And I think that science, the scientific age, several hundred years of that now, has devolved into scientism. And this tendency in science literally sometimes to dissect things to try and understand them, and compartmentalization, if a physicist tries to comment on chemistry, he gets shot down. The same as if a biologist tries to comment on physics, he gets shot down. So science isn't nothing, but it's not everything. But I think particularly with the episode that we lived through, all of us, in the last few years, with this, the so-called pandemic, we saw that in action. And Rupert Sheldrake, who I've had on as a guest several times, is very good on this, a scientist himself, but well aware that science isn't everything. He talks about the myth of scientific objectivity. Even the language of science is trying to take the human individual out of that process, but it can't be done. It cannot be done. So I think that's really what has delivered us into the predicament that we're in now, is that particular worldview. But the old worldviews never really gone away. They've just been marginalized. And I think we're living through a time now when they're re-emerging through desire, but also necessity, because as the materialistic, the world, the society and the culture and the systems, economic systems, energy systems, you name it, as they're beginning to crack and fail, it's this the Fortean mindset we've been referring to, and this other way of looking at the world that's giving us the tools to navigate this time, as I mentioned earlier.
Am I on mute? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Can I give you an example of that? What you're talking about there? It's just come to me. The story of Icarus, the Greek mythology, about the young man who flies too close to the sun and his wings are made of feathers and wax. And despite his father's warnings, he still goes up there and tries to fly, and the heat melts the wax and he dies. Well, if you look at that story scientifically, scientifically, you'd only focus on the impracticality of flying with wax wings or the effects of the heat on wax, and that misses the deeper meaning of the story. Whereas the real truth of that myth are things of the human experience, like ambition or hubris, and the dangers of kind of overreaching your own limitations. And the story sort of subconsciously resonates with people because it shows the struggle that we all have between our dreams and limitations. So it's not just about flying too high, as the scientists would look at it. It's about the risk that you take when you push yourself too far beyond your boundaries. And it could be the pursuit of knowledge or power or whatever. But it's a tale that's gone all through the centuries because it connects with our spiritual concerns in a way that scientific explanation just can't. And if the scientists looked at that, there's no way they're going to pick up that story is about the need to balance ambition with humility and not the impracticality of flying.
Have you got anything to add to that, Thomas?
Yeah, I think that's the kind of sophistication that you develop when you step outside the mainstream as a child through these like alternative forms of literature and filmmaking and stuff, that you start to see in terms of allegory and metaphor rather than just in actual facts. And I think that's a huge part of so many of these films. Even as a young child, you know, if you think, you know, you watch a film, right, and you say we've got the original Godzilla films, right, and you just say, well, that film is just about a monster who comes out of sea and attacks Japan, right? But in reality, it's the subconscious terrors of the atomic bomb's effect on Japan in World War II, manifested in a kind of a Jungian subterranean beast that comes to torment the Japanese soul in the middle of the night. There's a point in your life where if you don't make that, as you're developing, you might start off thinking it's about that, but then you'll start thinking about it later. And then that's the point in your life where you sort of like transform away from a black and white materialistic review of reality and a more sort of poetic metaphor latent version of it, and it's the thing that defines the difference between an NPC and someone who is a creative mind, because it's that leap towards just seeing something in a visionary sense, and I don't mean that in a mystical or religious sense, but in that with those archetypal eyes, that actually is where a sophistication manifests, but it also creates a richness of life, and it also shows you the power to convey secrets. I remember about 20 years ago watching Roger Corman's version of the Masquerade of the Red Death with Vincent Price in my parents' house. And there's a scene where Vincent Price is Prince Prospero. He has there's two basically dwarfs, a male and a female. And Prospero, played by Vincent Price, goes up to this horrible aristocrat, and he goes, "I know exactly what you're thinking, you sly devil." And he's going, "The possibilities." And then my mother just blurted out all of a sudden, "I watched that film back in the 60s. We didn't know it was about pedophilia, but that's what's going on here." And it was like watching my mother kind of grow in real time in her, she was probably more innocent in that age back then. But I think it gives you a vision to allow you to see things at a very rich level. And it's like you could look at a Monet painting, you could look at a painting of, say, Wyatt's painting of Christine's World, and you see a woman lying down in the grass looking at a house, and you say, "Oh, that's just a woman lying," and then you find out a backstory that she was disabled and she was trying to drag herself back to the house. It's that kind of extra sort of narrative vision that is really gained from the kind of worlds we grew up in and cultivated within ourselves.
Yeah, one thing that we were reminded of, just to move things on a little, immensely during the last several years, we kind of feel that we're putting the C-19 episode behind us, but we kind of aren't in a way, really. Do you know what I mean? So it's a bit like saying that 9/11 is over, and it's not. It really isn't. Or the First World War is over. It's not. Is this intolerance of ambiguity in most people? We have to know we have to have answers so we can sleep at night. We have to know what the situation is. So people will accept a falsehood because it's comforting rather than uncomfortable, not knowing, as it were. And of course, if you seek answers at any cost, even if they're not actually the answer, but just placeholders for an answer, you get into all sorts of problems. And you see this now, it's rife in all levels of society and culture. We just need to know. And that's what a lot of what allowed the C-19 episode to play out in the way that it did. I mentioned that you do refer to this in the book, actually, in a very meaningful way. It's a lot of how, what allowed it to play out in that way, because people just wanted answers. And it was like, there's a threat here, real or perceived, whatever. And the answer is the shot, if you see what I mean. So just do that and everything will get back to normal. What was it that people most wanted to do, really? And this is where, again, life imitates art. What people most wanted to do was get back to the mundane lives that were taken away from them, like shopping. So think Dawn of the Dead, for example. That's the archetypal example of that. People, the zombies in that film, Romero's one of his famous trilogy, slamming up against the doors of the mall that was denied to them. It was closed, and that was just the C-19 episode being played out. There was a fictionalized version. Then we all lived through it. So more and more, we've lived a lifetime of this. We begin to see things that we read about, these fictionalized accounts, these ideas, these mythologies, these stories. And suddenly we see them playing out, whether very literally or in some sort of adapted version. But that's what allows us, I think, psychologically to process them and not to be derailed by them, because it's kind of like, of course. But in the land of the people who cannot tolerate ambiguity, all of this fluidity, shall we say, in events is just agony. in itself. And that's why, and that's partly why we see, I mentioned the political scene earlier, partly why we see people saying, well, if we just elect a government, you know, we had a red government, let's get a blue one now, we had a blue one, let's get a red one, things will be okay. So no matter what the evidence of their senses is, you know, how much worse things are guessing, it's like, you know, if we keep doing the same, if we just, over the next brow of the hill will be, you know, a clear horizon.
Yeah, there's it's like the difference between Eastern and Western philosophy. Western philosophy just basically tells you if you don't find the answers in life, it's just a nihilistic existential battle and then you die, where Eastern philosophy is more on the concept of, you know, the journey, like in Taoism, the journey is the process, you know, regardless of the outcome. And I think that's like when you take your mind out of the everyday things and into things like the paranormal, into the Fortean, into the hauntological, that you actually do develop a very similar mindset to that Eastern philosophy mindset. That don't be concerning yourself with the final process. Don't be concerning yourself with the end. There maybe is no meaning to it, but there is an element of unbridled exploration into it. But you will find that level of conservatism also within the Fortean fields as well. I mean, when John Keel first came out with his ultra-terrestrials idea in the early 70s, he was thrown out of UFO conferences and everything for daring to say, I think it's all the same thing. UFOs, ghosts, paranormal, it's all the same thing. It's this ultra-terrestrial sort of like fairy fate culture thing that lives behind society. And then Rosemary Ellen Guiley in the 90s and 2000s experienced exactly the same thing when she said, I think it's the jinn. It's not flesh and blood spaceships and things like this. That's what I find interesting. You get people who go to the level of the Fortean, but they still maintain the programming, you know, and that's what I think me and Sarah wanted to do when we did this show and this book, is that we wanted to sort of say, well, look, you know, we're not going to, you know, we like for instance, the chapter on Nessie, that has nothing to do with cryptozoology, and I think that, you know, the way we look at it is far more interesting.
Yeah, and develop. Excuse me, put my teeth in. Cut that. Developing a Fortean mindset and looking at things in this way, it teaches you to rise above the consensus of everything, whether it's political or the gatekeepers of paranormal or folkloric stories, and you don't have an emotional attachment to it, so you rise above it and it all becomes like white noise, and it's kind of quite quiet and peaceful from this vantage point, and you're looking down at everybody going around the mundane lives and thinking that everything is one particular way or another particular way. Everything's got this duality and there's no middle ground. And from this point of view, it's just, you can just kind of see that there's more to it. Like with the Nessie, like what you said, Thomas, everybody thinks Nessie is some kind of
dinosaur.
Yeah, oh, sorry, yeah. Cryptid. Sorry, I had cryptic in my head. Sorry, excuse me. Everybody thinks that Nessie is some kind of cryptid. Nobody wants to look at the possibility that it might be a spiritual entity that comes in and out of this dimension. But
yeah, I think that's one of the... Sorry, Sarah. Sorry.
When you're not fixed on one particular outcome and your mind is open to consider this, or it could be this, or it could be that, then you get a much clearer picture and insights and things come to you. Ideas come to you.
Yeah, they're wanting the Nessie to be, you know, let's say long lost dinosaur or some other kind of cryptid. Wanting UFOs, they have to be physical craft with little green men in them. That's still fundamentalist materialism. It has to be a 3D 5 sense thing, you know, despite there being zero evidence whatsoever for any type of material, you know, alien spacecraft or alien species coming from other planets. There's just no evidence whatsoever for it. That's my take on it. I don't see any. We've got lots of stories about these things, but no actual evidence that anybody alive can actually go and inspect. But you mentioned, Thomas, you mentioned John Keel, and I think that's one of the key things that we've all the journey that we've all been on, that the sort of revelation that we've come to understand is that there is this fluid spectrum of things, that they can't be, as I mentioned earlier on, be dissected and compartmentalized, that there is something going on here, layers of reality that connect all of these things together. And I'm convinced at this stage, I remain to be proven incorrect. Of course, that's part of the deal here, is that, you have to, there are no final conclusions as such. We might discover some of those beyond this life, when we pass into whatever lies beyond it. But for the time being, in this reality, I don't think we'll have these conclusive answers. But there's just phenomena that are similar in some ways, different in others, but they are connected, and they're telling us something. It's one of the things I think that I felt early on, that whether it was fictionalized accounts or whether it was people reporting, Fortean phenomena, that these were kind of like messengers in a way. They were telling us what I said at the top of the hour, that this reality isn't what it appears to be, and that these weird manifestations and experiences that people have, it's an evolutionary, to quote David A. Moore, it's an evolutionary metaphor. It's something that's trying to move us mentally and psychologically forward at a time when we really are very stuck in that respect.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's this notion of interconnectedness is very different than the modern scientific process and method, where you have like one single chain of, and when it breaks, it's gone. That's the end of it. I could not have done my research into megaliths without incorporating Forteana and folklore. I could, and conversely, or by extension, I could not have done my research into folklore without Forteana and megaliths, and I couldn't have done my research into Forteana without megaliths and folklore. You know what I'm saying? Like, all three are intrinsically linked in my consciousness, that I can't, it's probably the most unscientific way of doing it, but to me, it's the only way of doing it that brings me any kind of satisfaction and expands the experience out into something quite remarkable, and how enjoyable and interesting it is.
Anything to add, Sarah?
No, I've got nothing to add to that.
Okay, so at one point early on in the book, you mentioned megaliths, so you're talking about Easter Island. Okay, almost everyone must know about that location and the famous statues that are there, and all the controversy and intrigue and mystery surrounding them. One thing that comes up in that, and multiple other issues that you look at in the book, I mean, it's one of the main themes in all of this, really, is this lack of a sense of deep time in human consciousness. The idea that, if you've got the biblical idea that the earth is just a few thousand years old, or that you go back to the Ice Age, and everything beyond that becomes very, very hazy. But there's this kind of like, and researchers like Graham Hancock have fallen foul of this, haven't they? Trying to look further back in time and say, well, maybe the human race is much older than we think it is, and here's some physical evidence suggesting this. But it's this, whether it's a willful or whether it's just unconscious lack of a sense of deep time, it really robs us, I think, of a lot of the bigger picture. Because just to use on simplistic physical terms, it is clear that the statues on Easter, to me anyway, the statues on Easter Island are very extremely ancient, much more so than people allege. They were clearly created there at a time when that landmass, well, the sea level was lower. So it does away with these questions of like, oh, how did this tiny little population on this little island, with like barely any space to grow food, how did they get the resources and time to make these statues or whatever? But archaeology in itself is is infected with pseudoscience. They accuse people like Graham of pseudoscientific ideas. So that's just one of the main themes, I think, is like this denial of a history of our species that extends potentially, as Michael Cremo asserts, into even millions of years.
Archaeology has a lot of gatekeepers, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. Egyptology is notorious for it, isn't it? You know, it's bizarre. It really is very, very odd. And again, I
I
mentioned,
know. Yeah, I know. Well, sorry, I know a woman here who was an archaeologist. She finally graduated, and she said that it was the most soul-destroying experience of her life. That they were not allowed to actually speculate on anything unless it was actually in the ground and what it was. You couldn't speculate on anything, and there was all kinds of gatekeepers saying, "Oh, it couldn't be this, all that, it couldn't be that, it couldn't be." And she would find things. They would find things in layers that were clearly in the wrong place. And the chief archaeologist in charge of the dig would just say, "Let me see that," and then it would be hidden and never talked about ever again. And she ended up becoming a piano teacher because she couldn't work in the field anymore. So it's notoriously full of gatekeepers.
Yeah, gatekeepers, and trust the experts. You know, don't question it because you trust the experts.
oh, well, that's something that we butted up against in the C19 phase, wasn't it? Really, and to our cost, you know, and and experts are also people born of that system I've been talking about of compartmentalization. You know, I'm an expert in quantum physics because that's all I study. God forbid that I study, you know, Renaissance art or something, you know, or if I try and draw connections between things that are seemingly disparate.
Yeah,
That's why scientists such as Carl Sagan are so incredibly rare. There are no polymaths, and there are no universities that are not universal at all.
yeah. The problem with experts is they're chosen study of field. If they want to go and look into something else as an alternative view, they seem to think that that might invalidate what they've been taught or what they believe. So they close their minds and they just go, it is just, they have blinkers.
I find the idea of not having answers really exhilarating. You know, I talked earlier about an intolerance of ambiguity. As much as I would love to solve certain mysteries, you know, like I don't know about you, Sarah, but Thomas and I have posted a lot and spoken a lot, for example, about the moon missions. You know, did they happen? Did they happen as we think they did? Thomas is of the view, generally speaking, that yes, they did, and that, you know, we can prove, we can see how this was done. I'm not so sure. I think if they did happen, they didn't happen as we've been told. But even the fact that we could just sort of say there's no problem in that, you know, you know, so we can agree to disagree, or I would love to have all of that in one sense, as I mentioned earlier, how, you know, that human tendency to just be able to sleep at night. But I still find it exhilarating that that the mystery of it, you know, mystery is something in itself that has value. You know, the events of 9/11 are still deeply mysterious, and I guess I would quite like to have someone unravel the unanswered questions and just say, you know, here's what really took place. That in itself would have its own level of fascination. But rather than a lack of knowledge or certainty keeping me awake at night, it's the sort of thing that sends me off to sleep with, you know, with that smile on my lips, just going, oh, it's just what an amazing world we find ourselves in, you know, with so much mystery and so many unanswered questions. It is not for us, you know, in this life, I think, to have these questions answered.
Well, funny you mention the Apollo thing, because I totally understand why people are skeptical about it and have doubts that it took place, because I was one of them, big time. And then I just decided, mainly when I was researching for the film Lever Velocity on Jack Parsons, that I just deeply went into studying all the engineering, and okay, everything seemed to check out. But it didn't create a situation where that mystery had ended, because then I started to take a real interest in the occult philosophy behind the likes of NASA and people and the experiences that astronauts had on the moon. And there's a lot of stuff about the lunar missions that is basically redacted. And it's everything from astronauts' personal experiences, the strange noises and things they heard on the moon and things they saw. And that to me then opened another kettle of fish in my world. And I said, is this the reason why they're comfortable with everyone trying to debunk Apollo? Because they'd rather have people thinking it never happened. I'm not saying this is the fact now, I'm just saying this is my speculation. They'd rather have the majority of people thinking it never happened than to come up with what the reality of what NASA experiences was, that they entered into the world of the paranormal. I mean, that's what I saw, that press conference. If you see the Apollo 11 astronauts, when they come back, look like they have been through some kind of bizarre shamanic experience and have seen something that they can't even possibly grasp. And you know, there's lots of people that spun that another way to say, oh, that's because they realized they have to lie to everyone. Sure, okay, I get that. But I think there's a huge amount of supernaturalism around the space exploration thing as a whole. And they would rather that's the last subject, and they have all kinds of gatekeepers in that too, particularly on the flying spacemen stuff, like the Stephen Greer characters and these kinds of people, who I don't trust at all, to keep the focused on this mechanical aspect of space travel. I think space travel is as Fortean and paranormal as like ghosts or anything else. I think there's something when you leave this planet's basic, you know, orbital area, you come into a psychedelic world, and that's why they never really went back to the moon and stuff. But that's just my theory. I could be wrong, but it opened up another kettle of kettle of fish for me, in that it set me on a new tangent. So even when you think if you think the magic of an exploration has been taken away, it often opens up new doors. It's the beauty of the whole Fortean thing.
Yeah, you only got to look at that. If you guys have probably seen it, but anybody watching who hasn't, look at Stephen Greer's interview on Project Camelot from many years ago. The body language of that guy was just like, whoa, you know, I wouldn't trust you as far as I could throw you, which is not very far.
Yeah.
William Shatner also had a similar experience to what you described, Thomas, when he went up into space recently. I think it was last year. He said he'd gone up there and it had been a lifelong dream of his, and he didn't like it. He said he didn't like it. He wanted to come back down, and he would never go up there again, he said, if he had the chance, because all he could see all around was blackness. He said there was nothing, absolutely nothing. And he said he never wanted to leave Earth again.
Well, we look at the personality changes. They were nearly all Navy Air Force pilots. These were hard drinking, womanizing, daredevil, combat veteran, all American tough guys. And you see what happened to Neil Armstrong. He literally became a sort of like a recluse, a monk. And the only one that seems to held it together was Buzz Aldrin. And he was sort of like the public face of it. And here he is all the time talking about, oh, we saw things up there, and there's a megalith on one of the moons of Mars we have to go and check out. You know, so it's when you start looking at it, it's like it's a lot more spooky than we were led to believe. And when you factor in things like Soviet cosmism, the belief that supernatural experiences aren't possible on this earth, but they are in space, where it's and that became very apparent to me when I looked through every single photo in the Apollo archive, and I felt like I was looking into a, you know, a demonic landscape. The more I looked at it, that the moon is a very scary place. I know we're going off topic here, kind of, but this is the beauty of this field, is that it's like if you don't adopt other people's assumptions, doors of speculation open up to you that are always very enriching, I find anyway.
Well, what we've been saying about, you know, events off world and, you know, the moon missions and experiences people have had when they've got off planet, though quite often, you know, people use the term space. What they're really talking about is the upper atmosphere, for example, where the International Space Station is. It was, you know, not that far off the planet as such, but it's certainly enough to have consciousness altering effects. A couple of things that you know, crop up in any sort of Fortean discussion or exploration, and you mentioned earlier, Thomas, this idea about ancient aliens and, you know, the building of megaliths, the idea that there had to be an intervention from off-world to make these things happen. And there's a lot of that in stories, accounts of human history, isn't there? Like something from off-planet happened. But then we have the history of reptilian imagery. It's replete throughout all human cultures through all of time. So the fact that we're fascinated, certainly I think all of us are, with like the night sky, you know, what is up there, what's happening, what lies beyond, whether it's in the moon, the wider solar system, the galaxy, and then you get into like what's beyond our own galaxy. It's just an endless source of fascination. It was one of the Sky at Night, the longest running TV show in history, was food and drink to me, you know, when I was a child and a teenager. But the fact is that the ancient alien mythos and reptilian mythos, they speak to something off-world, and it seems to me that wherever these mythologies come from, their connection to the stars is still very significant. So even if there has never been any life form that has arrived on Earth from beyond, that these mythologies are still very sick. There's a reason why these things persist, you know, and not just the ufology area when it comes to aliens, but you know, the Nephilim ancient alien idea, if you see what I mean, and where that intersects with reptilian mythos.
Well, just like you were saying, there's no evidence for, you know, some bold spaceships with spacemen from other planets ever visiting. There's no evidence for that either. None at all. And in fact, a lot of it I find quite insulting, that they insult human. I mean, Sarah and I were talking about this in the book in terms of ancient Egypt, that somehow ancient people were so stupid that they had to have aliens teach them agriculture and building and everything else, and they couldn't have developed themselves. It's also a handy excuse for academia who can't explain how things like the stones of Baalbek were moved. So they're perfectly happy with the plebs thinking it was, you know, that's why it shows like ancient aliens are so tolerant, that they're really big time gatekeeping shows. But yeah, there's no real evidence for that either. You know, the reptilian thing, yeah, but there's lots of other, you know, zoomorphic, anamorphic characters. These are avatars. These are like with the Hindu gods. They're just showing us the attributes of certain types of people or characters in terms of animalistic ways. So there's lots of bird people. There's lots of werewolves. There's lots of bear people. There's lots of reptilian people, and there's all different kinds out there, you know. And this is the people seem to concentrate over reliantly on the reptilian part, which is because it looks great in science fiction films and things like that. Everything from William Shatner fighting that alien in the suit, all the way to V and everything. It looks great on. It looks fantastic in movies, you know. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's endured. There's no star law really in the Celtic world, and people now, there's a reason for that. We don't have clear skies as much as in the Middle East, where you have the stars, and you know, as Crowley said, the you know, the unfolding of the company of heaven every time the sun goes down, and we don't have that in Northern Europe. So there's no star law really in the Nordic or the Celtic world. There's things to do with solstices and possibly lunar alignments, so that's a bit iffy. But there's none of that stuff. And so, you know, so they're taking it from a very limited part of the world, the Middle East, which seems to be the cauldron of a lot of the darkness in the world, I think. And it's, you know, it's another subject you go into. I'm not talking about like in terms of, I'm talking about the landscape itself and how it ferments, you know, experiences there. But yeah, I've never bought the ancient alien things. I always thought, I mean, I don't know how people can watch those shows. I saw one where it was on Newgrange here in Ireland, and they were saying it was a spaceship. You know, it looks like a flying saucer, and it's a mound. You know, and they then you find mounds all over the place, from everywhere from Wisconsin to, you know, India, and it's a mound. And then they give a story. You know, they'll have someone like David Wilcock on giving a story about, oh, this proves as an alien intervention thing. And, you know, if you look at, say, Sri Lanka, you have the Sigiriya, the ancient thing on top of the mountain. The ancient alien people love that. And they tie on the story of Hanuman, the Indian god, the Hindu god, flying over to Lanka to do battle. You know, it's like they say it's a spaceship. They don't seem to understand mythology. They're woefully ignorant of mythology. They know a little bit about theology, and then they convert everything into pretending it's allegories for spacemen. I even saw one of them on Ancient Aliens recently claiming that some religion. Oh yeah, oh, this is the best one. Oh, I couldn't believe it when I saw this. Now, this is how bad Ancient Aliens is. David Wilcox claims that the Blarney Stone is a spaceship. This is a stone in Ireland that was a tourist trap that was invented about 100 years ago to get people, you know, in a very impressive ancient castle. But it was a tourist trap basically to get people to spend money there. And he was claiming it was a UFO. You know, it was like, oh my God, you know, this is how bad that scene is.
David Wilcock is just like a new age grifter, really. you know, making cash off people, you know, that's susceptible, gullible, giving people the answers I spoke about earlier, you know, like putting an end to their uncertainty about these things. This is a guy that can apparently do a 13-hour talk without a piss break. And I'm like, straight away, that makes me suspicious. How can you talk for 13 hours without going to the bathroom?
But because his 13-hour talk is effluence. There we go.
Oh, there we another mystery solved. So in your book and in so many of these anomalous experiences and phenomena that we're talking about, the phrase comes up again and again, a disturbance in the field, glitch in the matrix. And I think that, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these things are, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I think that they're not far from being necessarily random, some of them anyway, not all of them, but I do think that there's something going on here. This reality is interactive. Excuse me, we're not just subject to this 5-sense 3D reality. What we can have an effect on it, if you see what I mean, and you know, if you think about it in quantum terms, and this is where the whole idea of magic comes from. But these glitches, these disturbances in the field, in the force, are part of that interactivity, and they're kind of pointing us to something. You know, we might think or say or do something, and then there's some kind of feedback in the field, if you see what I mean. So whether that is, you know, you experience a UFO encounter, or, you know, a fairy, or an encounter with the jinn or something, or you have a strange dream that seems to somehow then manifest itself in a Jungian way, you know, in the world out there, as it were. So I just think that there's something going on here that is very, very meaningful. So far from being random, that these anomalous Fortean phenomena, some of them at least, are part of a wider reality that we've maybe lost sight of. And I think we're talking about megalith builders and whatnot, that far from our current incarnation of humanity being the most advanced, I think there's a lot of things that we've lost. Many techniques and talents and insights and ways of being. I think we've devolved, in fact, you know.
I think a good example of that is how we can interact with reality, is how we've got this, it feels like we're living in two parallel timelines or two parallel worlds with the normies or the NPCs. So a lot of what they believe or the things that they follow don't exist in our world. The thought of going to a needlecraft class, for example, just doesn't exist in our world. Yet in their world, you've got people happily going to a needlecraft class 6, 7, 8. I think they're up to nine times now. But that doesn't exist for a lot of us. It's just not even on our radar to do. So I think as a result of that, we may have actually split in two, and not intentionally, but we've split off into two tribes, if you like, for want of a better word. You've got those that are following the masses and going off on the mainstream and the, you know, just the consensus, and then you've got the rest of us who have gone off on our own timeline, who are doing what we can to hold on to the old ways and just want to be left alone and don't want to have the wolf at the door.
Yeah, you posted something recently, Thomas, about timelines, didn't you? You know, about this, the nature of these things, and how they probably really are, as opposed to how we perceive them.
Yeah, so there's an assumption that's made that because we've moved away from the normie world, that we're the freaks. But the reality is, maybe the way more I think about it, we're the normal ones and they're the freaks. They're the ones who've gone into an unnatural path and in violation of natural law. And it seems to have been that way since the 9/11 event. That's just my theory. I could be wrong. That we're dealing with wave function collapses, and we're collapsing the wave back into what it should be for a stable human experience. And this ties in a lot with stories you'd hear about, like the legends behind Atlantis and things like that as well, about two factions creating one trying to stabilize reality and the others. That's a very common trope with a lot of sort of like esoteric lore. One ancient faction damaged reality and another one tried to repair it. And that seems to be what's happening right now. And we seem to be the ones trying to repair it. Yeah, I mean, this is why I'm a great believer in things like, hyperstition, the concept that it's almost like a chaos magic concept that if you pour enough emotional gravitas into something or talk about it, this was a big thing for me during the lockdowns to try and get people through it, including myself, most of all, was this whole thing that we'll literally generate our own reality where things like mandatory Britney Spears concerts and everything would not apply to us, and I'll do anything to get us through that. And this is very much based on the idea of hyperstition, the concept of imagining and building a new reality for ourselves as a kind of a breakaway civilization in a way. But really, we're probably normalizing where we should be as humans. I think that's really what's happening. We're the normal ones in what's called mainstream society, or the crackpots. That's very apparent to me right now.
Yeah, I feel a little bit, although they were non-human entities, the elementals in Sapphire and Steel, the TV show, they were trying to stabilize time, weren't they? To patch up rips in time and what have you, and just of all the chaotic entities that were trying to disrupt reality, they were there kind of necessarily going around firefighting, just sort of stabilizing events from the point of view of human perception. So it does feel a little bit like that, actually. I'm reminded also of the idea of thought forms and tulpas. This concept, it sounds very elitist, but I'm not afraid to go there, that there are way more bodies on Earth than there are souls, and that a lot of the kind of meat golems around us are just that. They're not actually human. And that, it sounds outrageous. It sounds fucking like neo-Nazi thing to say. It's not like that. If it's kind of some kind of fundamental reality, then it just is what it is. Like different entities are what they are, and different creatures are what they are. And if the three of us are the same type of entity potentially, then there's other entities that are just might look the same, but they're not.
Yeah, to me, it's an anthropological thing. It's like I'm just studying human beings and how they've changed in different ways, and rather than doing it in culturally, it's behaviors and so on. For instance, and you said it. Okay, it comes across as chauvinistic, elitist, and almost bordering on like eugenics or something, neo-Nazism. But I don't see it that way at all, because the kind of people that I am surrounded by and strive to be are of every race and nationality and religion on earth. If anything, we're the model citizens that the globalists want, but we're coming together to be anti-globalist almost. That's the great irony of it. That, well, the globalists try to talk about one world and split everything into factions. If you look at the Fortean world, it's made up of every kind of person on equal ground, and that's because nobody has a stake in the game beyond putting forward their viewpoint.
And a lot of viewpoints come through the TV. They come through the TV. So if you turn the TV off and you don't watch mainstream TV, a lot of this stuff doesn't exist for you. A lot of these fears and things that people are being brainwashed with day in, day out as they're eating their evening meal and watching the evening news, and then parroting it off at work the following day. I hear people talking in the supermarket and I think, what are they talking about? This doesn't exist. It doesn't exist for me because I don't watch the TV. And even that, I think, is people see that as you're elitist or you're a snob, you don't watch the TV. What, are you too good for it? Yeah.
Oh, I've had people like shoot me down in flames for like never having voted in my life. It's like, oh, you think you're above all this, do you? Well, it's not so much that. I'm just off to one side. It's not mandatory yet to participate in this. And it's not even like don't vote, it only encourages them. It's just at some deep fundamental level in my being, I'm not participating in that, that superficial political thing. It just doesn't feel right. So I'm not doing it in the same way that other things I avoid don't feel right. It's not being like superior in any way. It's just I'm not playing that game. That's all. There are other games.
In fact, you could liken that to saying, what, you don't want to go to the pantomime. Do you think you're too good for the Christmas pantomime? Because that's what it is. That's what the political arena is. It's a pantomime. It's a show.
Yeah, exactly. But again, it's a crabs in a bucket thing that I've mentioned many times. The way humans behave. You see like crabs that have been caught, and in the seaside and put into a bucket for, like, keeping to be taken away later. And one crab, this has been observed many times, one crab trying to get out of the bucket and succeeding, but another crab in the bucket pulling that crab back down into the bucket. Where do you think you're going? You're in this bucket with the rest of us. Don't you get ideas above your station, boy?
Funny you said that too about pantomime, because there's a James Joyce story called The Dead, a short story, and it takes place at Christmas, and they're all relaying how they went to see the latest opera company, and it was Puccini, they're all like magnificent, not this kind of thing. They're all very upper middle class. And this guy who's drunk turns around and says, the best show I saw this year, he says something like this, was a pantomime with a fantastic black singer from America. And they all went like, he broke their elitism by and the thing was, what he really did was announce that he was honest, that the best show that he'd seen was a pantomime that they looked down upon. He didn't mention like Verdi or something like that, Puccini. He mentioned a pantomime. And I always thought that was an amazing part of the book, because it demolished the fakery of normal life. You look like you're in mission control or something with that thing behind you, Greg, and whatever that is in front of you. It's like you got hidden satellite. Are you flying drones in your part time?
That's right, I am. Yes, there's one over both your houses currently, and as Judas Priest sang in The Electric Eye, I zoom into you. You don't know I'm there. No, it's I actually accidentally knocked my microphone there. Headset, but it's back online, I hope. So the last 30 seconds of what either of you said I missed, so if you could maybe just let me know where you left off.
Oh, it was your anecdote about that story you was relaying about the pantomime and the opera.
Yeah, you can be anything. If you want to talk about being formal and elitist, and you can be anything except honest, because it's funny that Sarah mentioned a pantomime there, because there's a James Joyce short story called The Dead, and it takes place at a Christmas dinner party, all very upper middle class, very snooty. And all the snobs are going about, I saw the latest Puccini opera, the opera company was magnificent, blah, 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 and this kind of thing, right? And this guy just turned around and said, the best show I saw all year was this black fella from America singing the pantomime. He was great. And they were all like a combination of, how dare you rattle our refinement, coupled with the fact that how dare you be honest and say the best thing that you saw this year was a pantomime.
Well, quite, yeah, and that's another delineation, isn't it? Between people is apart from politics and economic status, whatever, it's like cultural appreciation or whatever it happens to be. But in all of the cultures and subcultures that we talk about, in terms of Forteana and hauntology and what have you, a lot of the sci-fi and the horror and things that are spoken to us and that we see actually somehow being mirrored out there in the world is considered low culture, lowbrow, or has been, if you see what I mean. Certainly when science fiction, more horror as well, but science fiction was more so my thing, probably remains so. Despite some of the sci-fi classics that are regarded as in literary terms as classics, it was always looked down upon. Oh, you like sci-fi? Okay, so that's just just nonsense. You're not reading Proust or get this, E.M. Forster, writer of The Machine Stops. One of the most prototypical dystopian sci-fi books ever. But of course, that connection won't be made in a lot of people's minds.
Oh, that's so. Do you remember Barry Norman? Barry Norman used to, not so much on his TV show, The Film Reviewer on BBC, in his newspaper articles would just laugh and mock every single horror film, anything like that ever came out, while extolling the virtues of awful things like films about someone dying of cancer or a married couple still falling apart and this kind of thing. And I used to say, who would want to go to cinema and watch something like that? I'd rather watch a horror film or a sci-fi film than that any day. I never understood this need to see real life in front of me. I know it exists. I don't need a film about it. Give me fantasy. Give me something out of the frame. But yeah, that was a common thing when I was growing up, that you were a moron if you were into horror films. You know, I can even remember condescendingly, even that the only reason the TV station showed them was because they got big ratings. But they would condescendingly say things like, and you know, at 11 o'clock tonight we have some old film. If you're into that kind of thing with Vincent Price in, you know, Mask of the Red Dead, you know, it was like, you know, we're almost apologizing for showing it. And me, you know, there'll be huge numbers of people who are saying, great, that's our night sorted, you know.
But yet you look at something like The Mask of the Red Death, you know, it's a ravishing thing to look at. You know, it's great entertainment. You look at the layers of suggestive meaning there. You mentioned one that I'd actually forgotten about, you know, with the you know, the dwarves, you know, whatever, and that whole sexual deviancy, you know, level to it. Then you look at the C-19 episode that we all lived through, and the parallels in the situation there. You know, there's a disease ravaging the countryside around Prospero's castle, so him and his mates are all in there protected from that, you know. And so it was layers and layers of meaning and ideas and ways to interpret a reality in a cultural artifact from decades gone by.
Yeah. And not even, you know, like cowboy films, right? You have cowboy films that were just like shoot 'em up, cowboys and Indians, bank robbers, this kind of thing, right? And then you had like sophisticated films that came out, like The Searchers with John Wayne, which was really quite a deep film. John Wayne, John Ford Western, very, very deep meanings, and that was like a total departure for the Western. And then the Western went into this esoteric world, like High Plains Drifter with Clint Eastwood and stuff like that, which is really an occult film that's really what it is. And again, where did that come from? That came from a desire, because the shoot 'em up Western people didn't care anymore. We've seen it a million times: bad cowboys, Indians, good guys, bad guys. But when they started to put like allegories and metaphor into it, like The Searchers with John Wayne, and then later the Clint Eastwood films like The Unforgiven, High Plains Drifter, and so on, that they gave a whole new life to the Western. Now, I don't like traditional Westerns, but I like them for the simple reason that they're much closer to Roger Corman films than they are to, you know, Hollywood Westerns.
Yeah, I mentioned this in a recent, the most recent episode of a Hauntology and Dystopia vlog series when I was reviewing The Hard Way with Patrick McGowan and Lee Van Cleef. I mentioned Lee Van Cleef in Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy and how they elevated the Western in a different way, maybe not with the levels that you've just mentioned in High Plains Drifter, for example, but Clint Eastwood's still there, and it was a recapitulation of a genre with other levels of like meaning in there, without a doubt. And you know, archetypal meaning, I would say. You could look at those Westerns. You mentioned The Unforgiven. There's all sorts of others we could think about. And the again, on a Jungian level, the layers of interpretation that they open up to us in terms of, you know, our reality and you know, the human journey, and different types of people, different characters, you know, because you can see, we mentioned you know, thought forms and tulpas and different types of entities, and you can see these manifest even in a narrative, relatively apparently narrow narrative cycle like a Western, you know. So yeah, rich with meaning if you know what you're looking for, what you're seeing.
Yeah.
Can I just say off the record, Thomas, you look like a devil. You look at yourself in the camera. You've got those tentacles behind you. Perfect. You look like a devil or Taurus the bull.
Yeah, a Kurunos. I look like Kurunos. There we go.
Yeah, well, it's not off the record because I'm not going to edit that out. So it's on the record.
Okay. Oh, don't do that. As above, so below. You'll be getting, the truthers will be going nuts.
That would be no, that's John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever.
Oh yeah. Okay, guys. Well, I mean, as we begin to, you know, wind things up for today, a kind of question that always has arisen in my mind around studying these topics you know, off the beaten track, forbidden, you name it, forbidden science, forbidden archaeology, all the rest of it, forbidden technology, is that the people, the gatekeepers, and the people that seem to be spending so much time and effort in trying to shut people down, stop debates, the question is, what are they afraid of? In terms of human history, if humans have been around for millions of years, if we did assemble all these megalithic constructions, you know, by hand, if all the amazing achievements that appear to present so much mystery to so many people are actually explainable in terms of just human ingenuity and creativity, what is the agenda about trying to block this off and shut it down? What is it? Is it actually anti-human? When I say alien, I don't mean in an off-world sense, but is it an anti-human agenda to try and shut us off from our actual true potential? And what are the implications of that then for where we find ourselves now and going forward?
Secularism and religion, that's what it is. Originally, they shut it down because it was against, this includes dating of archaeological artifacts, because it was against Western religion, the Bible. That was the first reason. And now it's against the current religion, which is science. And that's it. It's as simple as that. They don't want you thinking outside of either their official theological religion of Christianity or Abrahamism, and they don't want you thinking outside their secular religion of scientism. To me, it's as simple as that.
And I think that's why the Ancient Alien series, that's where the Ancient Alien series comes in, because you've got people like Edward Leedscombe who built Coral Castle with his own bare hands, and I remember he appeared on that. He was on that show, his story, and they tried to explain that away by saying that he must have had alien intervention. And I don't think they want you to know just how capable ancient human beings were, and the basic law, natural law of physics that isn't taught in school. I don't think they want you to know that, because the pyramids were built using natural law of physics that's not taught in schools. It was the same technology that Edward Leedscombe used to build Coral Castle.
Another one that gets on my nerves, another one similar to what you're saying, Sarah, that gets on my nerves, is there's this video doing the rounds saying how the ancient megaliths were built, and they show some guy who's a retired guy in perfect laboratory conditions, moving around large pieces of stone. This is how Stonehenge, this is how this was built. And people are saying, he solved the mystery. And then they say, no need for aliens. And I'm like, first of all, he's working in perfect laboratory conditions, a concrete slab he's working on. Do that on top of a mountain in Sardinia, where stones bigger than the ones he had were brought down from the valley below. And, you know, and then suddenly they go, oh, what did that? Aliens. This ancient aliens thing is very, very sinister. It's convinced it's been put out there to hide the true or the mysteries of the megaliths, by saying aliens did it, and it also allows them to ridicule any alternative theory. And then they'll show that guy who, as again, the engineer guy who shows, it's like the famous one that we cover in the book, the Easter Island statues that the team from National Geographic, the scientists, they committed scientific fraud. They showed them wobbling this thing down the road, and they said that's how they moved them. And they knew fully well that those things have bodies going all the way down to their feet and sitting on plinths, but they only moved the part that sticks up out of the soil on Easter Island. You know, this is, I mean, people show the video, that's how they did it. You don't, you know, and that's gaslighting to me, because they don't want people knowing that the Easter Island statues go all the way down to their feet. Because then the next question is, how come if they're only a few hundred years old that they covered up to this much in soil? They don't want people asking those questions.
Yeah, they don't want people to know what wonderful feats human beings could achieve back in those days, because if that wasn't suppressed and the credit given to ancient aliens, then people would start asking, why have we regressed so much? Why is society like it is now? And then you'd have the normies pointing the finger at religion and Christianity and all the suppressed information and all those secret books under the Vatican that hides lots of ancient information as well. and secrets?
Well, in the last few days, the mainstream scientific people have said that the altar stone at Stonehenge possibly at least came from Aberdeenshire in northern Scotland, and possibly came from Orkney. And how the hell did Neolithic man, whose boats basically revolved around hollowed out tree trunks that held 2 or 3 people, get a massive stone from the Orkney Islands across the North Sea to Scotland and then all the way down to Britain? In the 1980s, they tried to prove how they moved the stones from the Pewelly Mountains, the Blue Stones, to Stonehenge, and they moved a relatively small one, and they said that they floated across the Severn, the River Severn, on a raft, and they built the raft, and the thing immediately sunk. Now, I was amazed that they actually openly said this stuff, but people are so dumb nowadays, they don't turn around and say, how the hell did they move it, except guys like us?
I think a lot of ancient suppressed knowledge has been hidden, destroyed, I don't know, taken out of the public arena, and the credit is given to ancient aliens to stop people asking why we've regressed, why we're like we are now, because all roads lead to religion. Yeah,
and I think this helplessness, this inculcated helplessness, is part of an agenda going forward. You mentioned technocracy and the Great Reset and the agenda of the World Economic Forum, etc. Going forward, is that the idea we can't do anything for ourselves. If we thought, for example, if we imagined that our forebears in whatever part of the world could create something like the megalithic constructions, then we would start to think, well, what could we do? But no, you can't do anything.
No, well, we just build glass monstrosities in city centres and call it architecture. That's what we do.
Well, knowledge vanishes so quickly. Like, they're now removing clocks from schools because students can't tell the time on an analog dial anymore. And so that's already now gone in our lifetimes, the telling of time.
Yeah, so, my argument would be, don't remove the clocks. It won't help them tell the time. Leave the clocks there.
So what will that lead to? In hundreds of years' time, somebody will find one of these watches. So how the hell did they build that? How the hell did these guys make that watch? And it's just the same way as the pyramids and the giant stones that have been moved. The knowledge it's lost like that, And I always, in terms of Ireland, I always talk about the 900 books on early Irish mythology and history that are basically hidden away in the Royal Irish Academy. And they claim, oh, it'd be too expensive to translate them. And these are probably the most important books in the history of Ireland, and we're not allowed access to them. Why?
Well, I would encourage folks to check out Hocus Focus, your YouTube series. Get the book, which is either just about to come out. Oh, there, Sarah's holding up a copy of it. I look forward to getting mine at the Mysterious Earth conference just coming up. So in terms of signing off, you both mentioned your online presence. Obviously, you've got that together and individually as well. So just share with folks where they can find you online, best place to buy the book, and also maybe Thomas, because you're speaking at the conference as well, throw in a mention of that. I'll be there speaking as well, as our friend and colleague Neil McDonald will be, the conference organizer. So yeah, just any and all of that.
Well, Sarah, you mentioned the conference and the book there.
Okay, yeah, so our book will be available at the upcoming Mysterious Earth conference starting on the 7th of September. Thomas will be are you doing a talk there, Thomas, or are you doing the emceeing?
I'm no, I won't really be doing much except adding to Neil's discussion about the film that he's releasing.
Well, I'll be there as well, and you'll find me at one of the side tables with big piles of books, happy to sign them for you, and Thomas will sign them as well. So if you come along to the Mysterious Earth in St. Anne's on the 7th of September, you'll be able to pick up these books, and they'll be limited edition because they'll be signed by both of us. And then from the 9th of September, they'll go on sale online globally. at, is it lulu.com, Thomas?
Everywhere, Amazon, everywhere, World of Books.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're returning with Hocus Focus in October, back to the regular schedule again. And I, again, will be there signing books at Mysterious Earth. The foreword to the book was written by Dr. Neil Rushton, so I want to thank him for that, and both of us want to thank him for that. He did a very eloquent and beautiful foreword. And another friend of the show and the scene in general. And we're already working on our second book. Sarah and I are already working out we enjoyed the experience so much that we decided we want to do it at least one more time. And so we're going to work on a second Hocus Focus book, which we'll probably start on after Christmas. And that's basically it. I mean, the show will return on Sarah's channel, which is Sara Mondaini, Wuthering Nights. Yeah, on YouTube. And you get my stuff mostly these days. I'm active on Beyond Room 313 in the context of this show, Beyond Room 313 channel on YouTube, and I'm quite active on Substack, writing articles basically on philosophy these days, and my philosophy, and so that's where you want to find my writings, other than my books, which you can buy anywhere. But my Substack page, I'm really enjoying that. I really enjoy Substack in general, anyway, and Beyond Room 313 on YouTube.
Yeah, and can I just say, I've got a website as well and a blog, and that's at saramondaini.com. And in regards to Hocus Focus, you'll probably notice that me and Thomas are usually burnt out by beginning of summer. So we normally take a summer break, and there's a bit of a pattern growing there, because every time we come back after the summer break, we always come back bigger and better with new ideas and a better production. So we're going to be doing the same again in October. Now, are we coming back at the beginning of October or the end of October, Thomas?
Well, it'll be the end of October, because I just want to mention one other event I'm doing. Myself and Maria Wheely will be doing a one-day conference in Glastonbury, which you can find the tickets for that on alternativeview.co.uk, and it will be a one-day conference on earth mysteries and megaliths, and a very intense sort of geomantic kind of event.
But you'll have Hocus Focus back from the end of October all the way through to the beginning of summer, so we'll be back.
Splendid. Well, once again, Thomas and Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today on legalizefreedom.com.
Thank you.
Thank you.
legalizefreedom.com